Hello, I'm John Wilson. Welcome to This Cultural Life, the Radio 4 podcast in which I ask leading creative figures to reveal the key moments in their life and the most important cultural works that fired their own artistic imagination. My guest is director, screenwriter and playwright Mike Leigh. He's known for gritty social dramas, including Vera Drake and Secrets and Lies, domestic comedies like Life is Sweet and Happy-Go-Lucky, and historical stories including Mr. Turner and Peterloo. I spoke to him in one of the many radio studios in BBC Broadcasting House. Mike, welcome to This Cultural Life. Let's take you to the beginning. What is your earliest cultural memory?
As a kid, we had, and I was exposed to, pantomime, live theatre of various sorts, circus. The circus was a big deal. Variety, live variety, the old, descendant of the music hall, including, at the age of 9, a trip to the Ardwick Hippodrome in Manchester to see Laurel and Hardy live on stage.
Wow.
On their famous tour, we later realised was the famous tour. And the two important things about that were, one, two extraordinary things. One is that it was in colour. They were in colour. And two, that Oliver Hardy completely couldn't get his act together at all. He was absolutely out of control. And of course, later we realised that was because he was cracking up, and it was the end of their career.
Were they funny?
No. But I was fascinated. It didn't make any difference. Of course, in school, from the earliest age, I was drawing, putting on sketches, generally wanting to be creative in all kinds of different ways.
This is Salford Grammar School.
Yeah, well, that's even, I'm talking about primary school, and, Salford Grammar School was, of course, later, and there I was in all the school plays and did art and all that stuff, yeah.
And your father was a doctor, wasn't he?
He was, and we lived over the surgery until I was about 13, and in a very working class area. My memory of coming home from school during the surgery hours, I could go in through a sort of pass door by that end of the house, and all you'd hear from the waiting room was chronic bronchitis. This is before the Clean Air Act. The Salford was a filthy, dirty place. The great Victorian buildings in central Manchester, I always thought they were black, because they were black. And years later, after the Clean Air Act, you'd go up to Manchester and you'd see, the classic town hall. And of course, this beautiful Portland stone. So in the middle of a very working class area, where, by the way, I shot my first television film, Hard Labour, all around that area. Because obviously we were middle class, my old man being a doctor, I went to the local schools, local primary school, working class kids, 90-odd%, Salford Grammar School, very much the same. So I kind of had a very broad sense of society, I suppose, of community and character. But character is what it's been all about from the word go, just observing people.
So it's a sort of a cultured upbringing to an extent. What's your creativity, your own personal creativity, encouraged by your parents?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I mean, it would be very difficult not to say that in many respects my folks weren't Philistines, because they kind of were. There's culture and there's culture. They actually at times went to Stratford and they went to the Halle, so you could say they were cultural. On the other hand, anything that was, in inverted commas, arty, or what we would identify as avant-garde, they were horrified by. But apart from anything else, from an early age, I was drawing people, and on the whole, you could describe what I was drawing as caricatures. And when I was about 6 or so, my dad forbade me from drawing grown-ups when they came round, because in case it might offend them. And throughout my development, he had a very, very strong resistance to my being an artist of any kind. Why was this the case? Why did he have this attitude or this or paranoia? The reason is very straightforward. His father, my paternal grandfather, was a commercial artist. He, they coloured in photographs in that wishy-washy way that used to be the mode. And they had a picture framing business. And in the slump, in the Depression, nobody wanted pictures or frames, and Grandpa couldn't feed the family. So my dad had a deep-seated fear of the notion of his offspring being an artist of any kind. It meant penury. Later, when I ran out of steam with the academic journey I was on and announced that I wanted to apply to go to drama school, he was, to say he was horrified would be a gross understatement. He thought it was the worst thing that could have happened. He assumed, he would have wanted me to be a doctor,
right,
or a lawyer or something.
Was there any chance that would have happened, though?
No, none whatever. I mean,
you never had an interest in medicine?
No, I mean, I knew from an early, I used to go to we haven't talked about movies. I used to go to the pictures as often as they'd let you, and there were 14 local cinemas walking distance from our house.
14?
14. I mean, flea pits, a lot of them, really decaying, ancient, horrible places, but they showed movies, and they showed usually the programme changed on a Wednesday and a different programme on Sunday, and each programme had 2 films in it. So you saw a lot of films, and perhaps we'll come back to that later.
Well, no, actually, I mean, what was the first film you saw? Can you remember?
Bambi.
Right.
But the main point is, I used to go to the movies. I used to watch westerns. And from the earliest age, I remember there were 2 things one major thing that I always thought about films was, wouldn't it be great if you could have a film where the characters in the film were like real people, not like actors? And the other thing, which is a far less significance or no importance at all, is that watching westerns, because of the nature of the number of frames on a length of film, the wheels on a vehicle or on a stagecoach would go around backwards.
Yes.
And I used to sit there thinking, when I make films, they'll go around the right way. Now, that was from a very early age.
What sort of age?
Oh, little. I mean, 6, 7, 8. I don't know.
You were thinking of making films at that age?
Well, I was thinking somehow that, and every time I saw anything, I was just interested in doing it, basically.
The first big cultural influence that you've picked that you suggest has had a formative effect on your work is Ronald Searle, illustrator, artist, best known for St Trinian's, for creating St Trinian's and for the Molesworth books, and also contributing illustrations and drawings to so many books and magazines over the years, in the post-war years. How did you discover Searle?
When I was at 6, somebody gave me a copy of Hurrah for St Trinian's, a collection of cartoons by Ronald Searle, for my birthday. That was it. The great thing about Searle is that he was, apart from being a great draftsman, he was a fantastic observer. And his style of drawing influenced my style. In fact, my handwriting to this day is influenced by Ronald Searle's style of handwriting.
And what was he doing? I mean, just to evoke a sense of his style.
There are 2 things, really. One is his observation of character and his expression of character, but the other is his line. He had a range of different kinds of line, but he had a great facility to allow the pen marks to be themselves. In other words, it was polished in his own terms, but it didn't affect to have a kind of gloss finish.
You actually studied art, didn't you, at Camberwell School of
Art?
I did. Did you ever think of becoming an artist, a visual artist?
I say this a little bit reluctantly. I guess I could have been a cartoonist, really. And people that know me and know what I've done would say that.
You think about the characterization that Ronald Searle comes up with in those drawings, those kind of quite spindly characters, they're sort of etiolated figures. Is there a link, do you think, in those characters, between those characters and some of the characters that you create in your film?
I think the important thing about Searle being an inspiration, or if you like, an influence on me, is not so much about specific characters. It's about a way of looking at the world. I mean, if you look at the characters in my films, and indeed plays, I never allow it to be described as naturalism. It's realism. It gets to the essence of what's real. I mean, you have to believe in it being absolutely real when you see, in the moment when you see it. But there's a sort of there's an edge. There's a distillation. There's a heightening, which is a natural thing for an artist like Ronald Searle to do, and that's what I do. So I can't talk about a direct correlation between this Ronald Searle character or that character in one of my films. It's about a way of looking at life, really.
The next big turning point, the next big influence, drawing, life drawing. Just tell us about that class.
Here's the thing. I went to RADA, I acted for a bit, including in a couple of films. I then went to Camberwell Art School on the foundation course for a year. I then spent a year in the theatre design department of the Central School of Arts and Crafts, and I went to the London Film School, all within 4 years. For me, those various kinds of study, the only year I spent, the only thing I did which wasn't directly related to theatre or film was the foundation course at Camberwell. But it was there that I had a really seminal experience as an artist. We were all sitting around and had a nude model, and everybody was quietly drawing away. And I looked around the room and I thought, what is happening in this room is something that we never experienced for one split second at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. Really creative work is happening. Everybody in the room is looking at something that's real and finding an organic, truthful way of expressing it, which we didn't do as student actors. It was all mechanical and superficial and inorganic and therefore dull. And that revelation in that moment in the life drawing class, was absolutely resonated with notions that I had on the go in a primitive form at that point in time, that somehow you could create theatre, you could create films in an organic way by collaborating in a way and using rehearsal as more than just a mechanical way of interpreting what somebody had already put down on paper.
And from what I understand, you gather a cast of actors, you have a subject in a very broad sense. You never give a title to the film. They're usually untitled, and then the year in which you're making the film. And then you ask each of those actors to create their own characters.
Well, I collaborate with each actor to create a character. And what I do to start with is to get each actor to really make lists of real people they know. And this involved long discussions, one-on-one with nobody else there with each actor. And we gradually, I finally whittle it down and choose the source, or usually sources, from people they know. So it means the actor has got somewhere to start, something to, like the artists, like the students looking at the subject, at the model in the life drawing class. The actor has got, he or she is going to start to stand up and play this person they actually know, and then that person they know, and then we meld them together and the character is created. But of course, the two famous myths about what I do with actors is, one is that the actors come with ideas and the committee is formed as to what the subject. That's not the case at all. In fact, it's essential that when I say to an actor, participate in this piece of work, this play or this film, we can't talk about a character because there isn't a character. You and I are going to collaborate to create a character, and you will never know anything about the whole thing except what your character knows.
So they don't know about the other characters?
Not until and unless they meet them in the context of the work.
Are they banned from talking to the other actors about...
Absolutely. But it works totally. Everybody enters into the spirit of it, and there's never been a case where anybody has, as it were, broken the rules or cheated. Actors are highly stimulated by it because it means each actor feels really in possession of something that only he or she has. And apart from anything else, it means that the actor isn't distracted or inhibited or in any way affected negatively by an overview. He or she, each actor or actress, sees the whole thing from the point of view of the character. But it mostly means that we can explore situations in a completely truthful and organic way and arrive at the dramatic material.
So the rehearsal process, the rehearsal room then, that's where the writing takes place in effect?
Well, it does and it doesn't. Actually, that's where we establish the premise. We're talking about films. The premise, I'd say the possibilities, the relationships and all that, but the actual writing in the detailed sense of who says what and who moves where and those things happen scene by scene, sequence by sequence, on location, in the location, while we're during the course of filming. So what I'm actually doing, as far as I'm concerned, is making it up as we go along, having prepared to do so for a few months before we start shooting.
And on set, are you ever writing down the lines and putting them on a piece of paper?
No, I don't write and give to the actors because we don't need to. It comes out of, they know it. And actually, one of the things that always amuses me and is, I think, interesting is that every time I've ever made a film, after a few days you hear an electrician or somebody say, I don't understand it. I mean, there's no script, but they know the lines. They never dry up. They never forget the lines. And of course, unlike an ordinary film, where particularly films where they don't rehearse properly, most of the time's taken up with people not being able to remember what to say and stuff, or looking for the character, which obviously in the case of my stuff, we've long since established who and how the character is.
Your next big influence is not so much a moment as a whole era. You want to talk about the 60s. You arrived in London from Salford in 1960, at the start of that decade. What are your key cultural memories of that moment when you arrived?
Well, first of all, talking about movies, for all the movies I saw between 1943, when I was born, and 1960, none of them wasn't in English. They were all Hollywood or British movies, with the exception of Le Ballon Rouge, that famous French short, which I was bored to tears by then, and I'm bored to tears by now. They showed it in school for some reason. So I'm in London, and I've just arrived, and somebody says, there's a sort of arts festival going on in St Pancras, and there's a film showing. Shall we go? So I said, yeah, let's go. This is literally in the first week or so. And there was this film in Swedish about a knight playing chess. Of course, I discovered Bergman, and I then discovered the French Nouvelle Vague that was going on. Abu de Souffle, Breathless, was playing. I discovered the Russian cinema. I discovered Satyajit Ray, the Bengali filmmaker. I discovered Rossellini and Bicycle Thieves, and Japanese cinema, Ozu, Kurosawa. I mean, it just was a massive revelation.
The whole world, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And what were these directors doing that was so different, do you think?
It's the possibilities. The thing about influence and the thing about being stimulated by what other artists do, it's as much about making you think about the possibilities of what you might do.
But with the French New Wave in particular, was it also about the visual style? Do you think that had a direct influence on your later work?
Well, I mean, the great move forward was shooting in the streets, was shooting in real places. Now, of course, unlike, for example, my compatriot Ken Loach, who was a great pioneer, who, again, was a great inspiration to me a little bit later on in the 60s, from the work that he and Tony Garnett, whom I was to work with in television for the BBC, their great revolution was to say, well, let's not, BBC drama is studio bound, let's get out there in the street with the guys that shoot documentaries and make it real in that sort of spontaneous and alive way.
But just thinking about some of your films and the way that you have explored social issues, whether that's unemployment in Meantime or backstreet abortion in Vera Drake or class and race in Secrets and Lies, do you regard yourself as a political filmmaker?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that my films, with the arguable exception of Peterloo, which is obviously about the Peterloo massacre and is without any question a simple statement about democracy, I think my films must be understood to be implicitly political rather than overtly political.
You once said, I'm going to quote you here, you said, "I know I return endlessly to the same preoccupations, but I'm not always aware of it initially." What are those preoccupations, do you think?
Well, I mean, if you look at my films and plays, it's about how we live, relationships, work, responsibility, surviving, secrets and lies, the stuff of living, really.
Class?
And class, yes. That's funny, it's interesting thing. I didn't put that instinctively at the top of the list, but fair dues,
Could you characterise a typical Mike Leigh film? What sort of films does Mike Leigh make?
No, I couldn't do that, and I'm not going to try.
You've chosen as your next cultural moment an experience from 1965. You directed the original production of Little Malcolm and his struggle against the eunuchs, a play by David Halliwell. You've described this experience as a life-changing experience. Why?
Because David Halliwell, who was a close friend and a very talented guy, is no longer with us. But he wrote the play so that he could play the main character, Malcolm Scrawdyke. And to cut a long story short, it was impossible to direct. He'd say, "Well, a director's just a chairman." I said, "Well, why don't you move over there on that?" And he'd say, "Well, why? I could move there. I could move anywhere, And so, at this point, I'd already, we've talked about this, I'd already formulated notions about, because I wanted to write and direct, and I'd formulated notions about other ways, collaborative ways of making work. And this experience, much though I think the play is great, and much though I was very fond of Halliwell, and we had a good gang of folk involved, it was a defining experience just because I decided that this is not what I was going to do. I was not going to battle with scripts. I was going to find a way of creating organic work, basically.
How do you regard theatre now as somebody who is primarily regarded as a filmmaker?
Well, I mean, there are two sides of the experience, really. I mean, I love filmmaking. I love everything about film. I love being out in making the heightened distilled drama happen in real places. I love what you can do with film. And apart from anything else, I love the way that film can be disseminated very widely. Theatre is a whole different experience. It's in this closed place, but for the audience experience of theatre is very important because you're actually there. I call it the trapeze factor. You go to the circus, you're in that space, she's in that space on the trapeze. If she falls off the trapeze and breaks her neck, she's doing it in your space. Now, I always say that in films and movies, I aspire to the condition of theatre. In other words, to the condition of trapeze, so that although the audience knows objectively that they're watching something on a two-dimensional screen, that you are drawn into it so that you really have that sense of reality. And I want my plays in the theatre to aspire to the condition of cinema, in the sense that you really, really believe that they're in that real place and it's happening. So.
One of your best-known works is Abigail's Party, which people think about as a play for today on television, but it actually started out on the stage. It was written as a stage play. Are you surprised at the enduring appeal of that piece?
Yes and no. I mean, one of the reasons why it became so popular is because when it was, I mean, we did it in the theatre, at Hampstead Theatre in North London, and it was very successful. And the producer, Margaret Matheson, was short of something because something had been cancelled, and so we wheeled it into the television studio after 104 performances in the theatre. So it was very solid, and just did it. The third time it was shown on BBC was on an evening, on a night when storms raged throughout the British Isles. There was a strike on ITV and a very posh programme with Jonathan Miller, an esoteric programme on BBC Two. There were only 3 channels at the time. This is before Channel 4 was invented. And so 16 million people tuned in to BBC One and watched Abigail's party. And in many ways, the rest is history.
Lawrence, Angela likes Demis Roussos, Tony likes Demis Roussos, I like Demis Roussos, and Sue would like to hear Demis Roussos. So please, do you think we could have Demis Roussos on?
Yes.
Thank you.
At the time, I'd moved to the suburbs with my now ex-wife, Alison Steadman, who of course was in it. We were living that bohemian, but nonetheless a suburban experience, you know. And we were talking about having kids. Indeed, my elder son, Toby Leigh, the illustrator, is discernibly inside Beverly's tummy when you watch the television version. I think I would have to say that the play worked as a piece and, you know, spoke to the audience, really.
What drives you on now, Mike?
Well, I was slightly early here, and so I stood at Oxford Circus for a bit. And I did what I do, which I just clocked people walking past, really. And then, because I knew I was coming here to do this programme, I jumped on the tube, and I caught myself doing what I do, which is to clock everybody coming down the escalator, going up the escalator as we went down, just seeing characters, basically. So fundamentally, what drives me is people and life, and wanting to capture it and deal with it and distill it and tell stories about it.
Mike Leigh, thank you very much indeed for sharing your cultural life.
Thank you.